and welcome to From Harm to Home, the Westminster Violence Against Women and Girls Housing First podcast. My name is Louisa and I will be your host for this series, guiding you through the exciting and innovative world of the Westminster Violence Against Women and Girls Housing First project. The project provides housing and long-term wraparound support for women with experience of long-term homelessness, multiple disadvantage and any form of violence against women and girls in Westminster in London. We are making this podcast to showcase some of the amazing partners and people involved in this project, to create a platform for the women accessing the project to talk about their experiences, and more generally to tell the world about how it works and what we have learnt along the way. In this episode of the podcast, we'll be talking to Ella, Senior Housing First project worker on the service, about what a typical day in the life of a Housing First worker looks like. Hello, Ella.
Hi, Louisa. Thank you for having me.
No worries at all. Thank you for coming on. So, can you start us off by telling us a bit about the Housing First worker role in the Westminster VAWG Housing First service? So, kind of how many women does a worker support? What kind of things do you support with?
Yeah, of course. So, project workers in our service have caseloads of around 6 to 7 women usually, which obviously differs a lot from kind of more typical homelessness or floating support services, which would have, caseloads of 20, 30. Just means that we're able to offer that really kind of intensive support and see and speak to the women that we work with, multiple times a week. Housing First project workers kind of support with everything. A lot of kind of what we do would be coordinating the women's support networks and taking them to various appointments, getting them linked in with services. So that might be a GP, the job centre, a mental health service, a substance use service. Obviously, our service is designed to work with women who've maybe had difficulty engaging with support in the past. So I think a really key part of our role is that we want to build that trust with them so that we're then able to kind of guide them in being able to be supported by all those other really important services. Obviously, the domestic abuse and VAWG element is a huge part of our role. A lot of that is kind of building that trust with the woman so that we're able to talk to them about their experiences. That can range from kind of things that they've experienced in the past that they might want to disclose to anything that might be happening currently that we need to be aware of in terms of any risk to them and their safety. And then that leads into kind of wider work with safety planning, supporting them to engage with the police if that's something that they want to do. And then in the background, we might be, thinking about safeguarding and MARAC and all those kinds of things. I guess another important part is obviously the housing element. The long-term goal is for the women to be in a Housing First flat, but in the meantime, we do a lot with supporting the women into different accommodation options. So maybe, TA, temporary accommodation, various hostels that we have partnerships with, supporting them through that whole kind of process. And, it can be really difficult feeling like you're having to move from place to place all of the time. So it's nice that we're able to be kind of there through every part of that journey.
That sounds amazing. So not a lot then, basically.
Not at all.
Okay, can you bring things to life a bit and tell us give us an example. What does a typical day at work look like for you?
Yes, I love when people ask me this because it's such a hard question to answer because I could genuinely say I've probably had never 2 days that have been similar in this job. But that's what I love about this role and about this service is like the flexibility of it and the way that we have that like freedom to work really creatively with the women. Generally, I would say my day usually starts with admin, like catching up on emails, case notes, doing any referrals that might have come off the back of anything that I've done the day before. And then I'll usually head out on outreach. This can depend on kind of your caseload, but most of my women at the moment are in the same area. So I usually am able to kind of see a lot of them when I'm on outreach in that particular area. You do a lot of walking in this job. It's a lot of like, really assertive outreach. If we don't see a woman one day, it's us going back, multiple more days in that week to see if we can find them and we can engage with them. Sometimes that will be a quick check-in. How are you? Get them a hot drink, a little kind of talk about how they're doing, and maybe they don't want to have a longer kind of session in that moment, which is fine. Sometimes it might be, going with them to the pharmacy or to any appointments that they might have. But then some days we can have, a move that's happening and that will take up the whole day. Or for example, the other day I spent around 8 hours in A&E with one of my service users, and then that was obviously the whole day. So it can be so different, which is the nice thing, is that we do have that flexibility. So if there is a crisis happening with one of the women, we are able to kind of work around that and be there with her in that time of crisis, which is really nice, and I think quite a unique thing with having smaller caseloads. I hope that answered the question. As I say, a typical day is like hard to describe.
Yeah. Busy. I can appreciate that. Do you so obviously outreach is a major part of the role, going out to women who are still sleeping rough. But do you also visit women in supported accommodation and visit women in their flats as well?
Definitely. So the women who are already in Housing First flats, yeah, a lot of that engagement with them will look like going physically to their flat, maybe helping them with anything that they are struggling with, that could be to do with their utilities, or just kind of generally in the flat to go and have a look at how they're getting on and anything that they might need our support with, or just to have a chat and a check-in, which is the nice thing about the support being open-ended in this service, is that we do see that journey from, being maybe more in the kind of crisis intervention, a lot of incidents and doing that, all that risk assessing, to seeing that woman move through that journey. And more when you're seeing her, it's kind of just checking in around how she's doing and how she's settling in the flat. And yes, definitely hostel supported accommodation settings will spend a lot of time there. It's obviously so dependent on the woman and the scenario that they're in, and also where they kind of, I think you get to learn with each woman where they maybe feel more comfortable opening up. Like some women, if you're sat down with them, are not going to have the same comfortability as if you're walking, I find. So it's like kind of being led by them in the way that they want to engage with you on that day. So yeah, the setting can definitely be different.
Great. Thank you. What do you do to support women around their experiences of violence and abuse? Are there any helpful tools or approaches you use, or can you think of a few key things to remember or bear in mind when you're working with this group of women around violence and abuse?
I think working in multiple disadvantage, I think the difference from regular DA services is that you really do have to let the woman lead. You really need to try to build that relationship and that trust to the point where they're going to feel comfortable to open up to you and to make kind of disclosures around abuse. I mean, in my experience, that can take a week, or that can take, 6-7 months to kind of get to that point. The women that we work with a lot of the time will have felt so let down by services in the past. So, opening up and making those disclosures is maybe not something that feels as natural or comfortable to them. So I think that's the main thing in this, is going at their speed. And then once you do have those disclosures, I guess safety planning and risk assessing also looks quite different in this job. I think the safety planning is more kind of thinking about what the women are already doing, especially because our women that are rough sleeping, they're safety planning every minute of every day. That's their whole life. recognizing that and talking to them about the things that they're already doing, and okay, how can I make that easier for you? Can I get you a phone so that you're able to call emergency services if this happens? And then I think the other really important thing is giving them all of the options, never imposing anything, never saying, I'm taking you to a refuge today because I'm really concerned about you, because that kind of approach just doesn't really work in this role. But it's giving them those options and saying, if you do decide this is what you want, these are the different things that I can do for you. So whether that is moving them, off of the street into safe accommodation, or engaging with the police, talking about non-molestation orders and things like that. It's quite unique in this job as well, because a lot of the time you will have interaction with the perpetrators, which is, again, quite different from usual DA services, especially for the women who are rough sleeping. Often when you first have that initial engagement, the perpetrators will very much be there and in the picture. And I actually think it's quite important for the women to feel that they can trust that you're not trying to come in between. You're not saying to her that she needs to leave or that any of that needs to happen, but you're saying, I'm here if you do make that decision. Never imposing anything, but giving that kind of choice and agency, which I think can be really empowering. Again, then there's a lot that's going on in the background with kind of building support networks and making sure that the risk and information is being shared there, referring into, MARAC, making police reports if that's what the woman wants. But I think the key thing with talking about abuse and violence against women and girls in this role is just going at their pace and giving them all of the options and all of the different choices.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Are there any partnerships that are particularly key to ensuring women get the housing and support that they need, do you think?
A lot. I think this job would not work without strong partnerships. Obviously, the relationship and the partnerships that we have with the housing associations who supply the flats, and with the housing officers who are then kind of in charge of whatever patch the women move to, is key. And that being strong can make a really big difference to the women being able to settle in, but also if risk does come up, if incidents do happen, being able to resolve that without it kind of escalating. It's definitely a really key partnership. And obviously that's where it's amazing that we work in partnership with you, with Standing Together, because we have that kind of link, which is really nice, like knowing that you have that backing, because sometimes it can feel a little bit like you're screaming at a brick wall. So it's nice to have that, like, back up in a way. We, especially kind of in Westminster, are quite lucky that there are quite a lot of multiple disadvantaged services, which is quite unique. And it's not lost on me that this job would be a lot more difficult in boroughs and parts of the UK where that isn't happening yet. Different mental health services and substance use services specifically for people experiencing multiple disadvantage. Also in Westminster, we have a few women-only supported accommodation services, which we have really strong relationships with, which is super important, especially if you have a woman on the street who, calls you one day and says, I want to go inside, like knowing that you've got those referral pathways and you have relationships with the workers at those services can make that transition a lot easier. And then I think partnerships with other kind of organisations in terms of safety is, again, in Westminster, the MARAC structure is really good. Having that relationship with the coordinator and with the police reps can make a huge difference. I've worked a lot with Drive, the perpetrator program, and done some really kind of amazing like MDT work with them, which can feel really great for kind of sharing the load and sharing the risk. There's a lot of partnerships in this job, and in outreach as well. We have to obviously consider our own safety. So having other agencies that you can go on outreach with is amazing, and doing that kind of joint working. Again, in Westminster, there's a lot of outreach services and they're all really, really amazing and helpful, and have helped us a lot, especially in those beginning stages of building that relationship with the women. Yeah, a lot of partnerships.
Amazing. Yeah, partnerships are so key to Housing First. And yeah, it's interesting, particularly around those partnerships, yeah, with Drive, and around kind of managing and working with perpetrators as well.
Yeah.
Because obviously they are quite often present, when you're doing Housing First with this cohort of women.
Yeah, exactly.
And finally, Ella, if you could give one piece of advice to another professional who is supporting a woman with similar needs, maybe to those supported by your service, what would it be?
Probably just to take your time, you know, realize that things with women who've had the kind of experiences that the women we work with have, that it's not going to be an overnight relationship. It's not going to be an overnight, I want to change this, this, and this. Get to know them and build that trust, and show them that even if they kind of push back or they disappear for a while, like, we're not going anywhere, you know, we're going to keep trying, and we're going to continually be there for them. Whether that takes, you know, a few weeks or 2 years for a woman to feel ready to make those kinds of changes, like letting them know that you're going to be there for that whole journey. Just take it slow, you know. Kind of change in this kind of work, it doesn't happen overnight, and that's definitely a hard thing to get used to, like, especially if you're starting out in this sector. But take those small wins as well, you know, like, think about the things that for some of the women, maybe getting scripted is a huge deal, you know, that's like can be a really, really positive change. And maybe people who don't work in multiple disadvantage would kind of see that as just something that happens. But actually, for the women that we work with, that can be a really huge step for them. And we have been there for that. So take the small wins and take it slow would probably be the main bits of advice.
I think those are really good advice. And yeah, especially like stuff about the small wins, because even, you know, a woman getting scripted, you'd think, well, that's nothing to do with, you know, that's not helping her experience of domestic abuse. But actually it is. It's all connected.
Everything, all connected. Yeah.
Brilliant. Ella, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening, and see you for the next episode, where we finally hear from arguably the most important people in the project, the women themselves. They spoke about how their life has changed since receiving the support from Housing First, and shared important messages they want other services to hear. If you would like to find out more about the Westminster VAWG Housing First project, please visit our website at www.standingtogether.org.uk. This podcast is written by me, Louisa Steele, and produced and edited by the amazing Holly Ringrose. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating and review. To stay up to date with the podcast, you can follow us on the Multiple Disadvantage and Homelessness team channel on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening.